The harbor cafe filled with the same crowd every morning. Young sailors spread across the tables, smoking, laughing loudly. In the corner booth, the old man always sat alone. A faded sailor's jacket, cold tea, and an old map nobody ever asked to open. One morning, a young officer stopped beside his table. He looked at the map. "How old is that thing?" he asked, his voice carrying a faint amusement. "Practically a museum piece." The old man looked at the map, then at the officer. 1973, he said quietly. "I took a submarine into Soviet waters with this map. Nobody saw us, nobody heard us, and nobody ever knew." The officer had no answer. The old man took a sip of his tea. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Modern Faces of Life so you never miss these powerful stories of courage and hidden strength. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Arthur Kane was 68 years old and came to Norfolk Harbor every morning at exactly 8 o'clock. He had no boat. He had no assignment. He just sat at the corner table, ordered his tea, and looked at the sea. The harbor staff had gotten used to him. He exchanged greetings with the cafe owner. He sometimes talked with one of the older fishermen, but mostly he sat in silence. He would open his map, mark something, then fold it back and put it in his pocket. Young sailors didn't notice him. Those who did didn't think twice. With his faded jacket, white hair, and corner table, Arthur just looked like a retired sailor. Maybe an old deckhand, maybe someone who had worked small boats. Nobody thought deeper than that. But Arthur Kane's past went far deeper than anyone imagined. Every morning he walked the same route to the harbor, same steps, same pace, every day. Harbor worker Tommy had once joked with him, "Kane, we could set our watches by you." Arthur had laughed, a real laugh. "Habit," he had said. "At sea, habit saves lives." Tommy had taken it as a figure of speech. Arthur had meant it literally. The first crack came because of a naval exercise report. Base Commander Captain Reynolds was reviewing the results of a 3-day submarine exercise. The exercise had been theoretically successful, but the same sonar error kept appearing at the same point in the simulation. Technicians looked at it, engineers examined it. Nobody could produce a definitive explanation. Reynolds was sitting at his desk, thinking when his aide came in. "Commander, there's a man at the harbor," he said. "Retired submarine officer. Sometimes the young officers here ask him questions and he gives them answers." Reynolds looked up. "Name?" "Kane, Arthur Kane." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. "Where?" he asked. Arthur was in the harbor cafe. His map was in front of him. When Reynolds walked in, Arthur didn't even look up. Reynolds sat across from him. "Kane," he said, "would you look at an exercise report?" Arthur turned the pages, slowly, looking at each page separately. Then he closed the report. "Thermocline layer," he said. 340 meters depth. At this point, sonar always drifts. The temperature difference refracts the sound. Reynolds leaned forward. "How do you know that?" Arthur opened his map. An old map, yellowed. Its edges marked, covered in notes. He pointed to a spot with his finger. "Here," he said. 1973. Barents Sea. At exactly these coordinates, at exactly this depth, our sonar couldn't detect us for 40 minutes. He paused. "The Soviets were searching for us. We passed through." Reynolds looked at the map, then at Arthur. And we came back," said Arthur. "But it wasn't just luck. We knew about the layer. We used it." Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "This operation," he said slowly, "it's not in the official records." Arthur closed his map. "Many things aren't in the official records," he said. Reynolds didn't ask more questions that day, but he couldn't get it out of his mind. When he returned to the base, he went into the archives. Arthur Kane. There wasn't much data to search. Name, date of birth, retirement date, and then a long blank space. He ran a deeper search with his classified access code. And he found it wasn't comprehensive, a few lines, a few codes. But it was enough. Arthur Kane had served in the most classified submarine unit of the U.S. Navy from 1965 to 1981. During the Cold War, he had commanded at least 4 separate operations targeting Soviet waters. Every operation had been completed successfully. None of them appeared in official history. When he retired, he had been offered various positions: consulting, academic, private sector. He had declined them all. Reynolds closed the file. He looked out the window toward the harbor. In the distance, as a tiny silhouette, Arthur Kane was sitting at his corner table. What would you have done passing through that harbor? Looking at the old man at that corner table, with his faded jacket, old map, and cold tea? Would you have seen only a retired sailor? Or would you have noticed that every mark on that map was the trace of a decision, a night, a held breath? Reynolds went to the harbor the next morning, an unofficial visit this time, no uniform, alone. Arthur was at his table. Reynolds sat beside him. Arthur didn't take his gaze from the sea. "I looked at the files last night," said Reynolds. Arthur stayed quiet. "4 operations," said Reynolds. "Barents, Black Sea, Norwegian waters, and one more whose code I couldn't even decode." Arthur took a sip of his tea. "Why are you here?" Reynolds asked. Arthur was quiet for a long time. He looked at the sea. Seagulls passed low. A fishing boat appeared on the horizon, slowly drawing closer. "I miss the sea," he said finally. Reynolds had waited for more, but Arthur didn't continue. "Is that all?" Reynolds asked. Arthur opened his map. He pointed to a spot with his finger. "At this point," he said, "in 1973 there was a man. He was on our sonar. His name was Billy Marsh. He was 22 years old." He paused. "That night, I noticed the thermocline layer. I told him. We passed through. We came back." He closed the map. "Billy is somewhere taking care of his grandchildren now. I don't know this for certain, but I hope so." He looked at the table. "That's why I'm here. I come every morning because every time I look at that sea, I remember Billy. And I want to remember." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "Are there others?" he asked. Arthur closed his eyes. He stayed that way for a moment, then opened them. "All of them," he said. "In every operation, every night, all of them." Weeks passed. Reynolds invited Arthur to the base, not official, informal. "Could you talk to the young officers?" he asked. "Could you look at the exercise results?" Arthur accepted, with one condition. "No name," he said. "No rank. Just conversation." Reynolds agreed. When Arthur came to the base, the young officers didn't notice him. Old sailor's jacket, quiet steps. He walked into the briefing room, sat in the back. Reynolds began the presentation, walked through the exercise results. Then he turned to Arthur. "What do you think about this?" Arthur stood up. He opened his map, and he began to speak. He spoke for 45 minutes. About thermocline layers, Soviet sonar systems, deep water currents, night operations. Every sentence came from experience, every example from a real night, a real decision. The room was completely silent. At the end, a young officer raised his hand. "These things you've described," he said slowly. "They're not in the textbooks." Arthur closed his map. "No," he said, "because to write a textbook, you have to survive. And to survive, you sometimes have to know things that aren't in the textbook." Months passed. Arthur came to the base every week. Sometimes he looked at exercise results. Sometimes he just sat and listened. The young officers began to know him, first by name, then by story, then with respect. One day, Captain Reynolds was in his office talking with a young lieutenant. The lieutenant said something about Arthur. That man knows everything, he said. Why did he never write any of it down? Reynolds looked out the window toward the harbor. Arthur was at his corner table. His map was in front of him. Some people don't like to write, said Reynolds. They just live. That evening, as Arthur was leaving the harbor, Reynolds caught up with him. Kane, he said, I want to ask you something. Arthur waited. Those 4 operations, said Reynolds. Were you ever afraid? Arthur thought for a moment. He genuinely thought. Then he spoke. Every time, he said. Every operation, every night. He paused. Anyone who says they weren't afraid is either lying or didn't understand the danger. He looked at the harbor lights. But fear shouldn't stop you. It should just make you careful. Reynolds nodded. And you were always careful. Arthur smiled slowly. No, he said. I was always lucky. He paused. But luck is also the product of preparation. He walked. His steps were slow but certain. The harbor lights shimmered on the water. In the distance, a submarine silhouette was visible, moving toward the darkness. Arthur stopped for a moment. He looked, then kept walking. Some people make history. Others live inside history and never tell anyone. Arthur Kane was the second kind. In the darkest seas of the Cold War, in the most dangerous waters, in nights nobody knew about, he made decisions. Those decisions saved lives. Those nights wrote history. But his name appeared in no book. And Arthur Kane was not troubled by that. Because every morning when he came to the harbor, when he looked at that sea, when he remembered Billy Marsh and the others, he knew that what he had done was right. No name was needed. No page was needed. Just the sea, just the map. And just that morning, tea was enough. Cinematic, hyper-realistic photo, horizontal 16:9 widescreen. A weathered 68-year-old man in a faded navy sailor jacket sitting alone at a corner harbor cafe table. An old yellowed map spread open in front of him, cold tea beside it, sharp, calm eyes looking toward the sea through a wide window. Harbor and ships visible wide in the background. Morning light, young sailors blurred laughing in background, completely ignoring him. Landscape orientation, photorealistic, 8K, YouTube thumbnail format,